True to their principles of peaceful cooperation, they actively work with their neighbors on community activities.
93 by 106. It's a Lone Star. There it is. Look how pretty there. Wow.
Auctions include everything from Amish quilts and used buggies to tractors. The past lives side by side with the present in peace and prosperity. No war has ever torn this nation apart philosophically the way the war between the states did. No battle before or since has cost as many American lives as the one at Gettysburg in July 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg proved to be a watershed for the Union, turning the tide of the Civil War in its favor. Confederate soldiers fought gallantly and well. The desperate courage and stunning heroism of General Pickett's charge is legendary. 12,000 soldiers dressed in Confederate gray charged Cemetery Ridge across an open wheat field in broad daylight. Deadly Union fire gave the words slaughter and carnage a devastating new dimension. Four months later, a bowed and haggard President Lincoln gave a speech dedicating the National Cemetery at Gettysburg. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The South incorporates a stunningly rich diversity of American cultures: Appalachian, Old South, New South, African, Cuban, and Cajun. Power and beauty have always held a natural attraction, but seldom are they combined in a single space. As the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C. emanates the aura of power. When the cherry trees make their spring metamorphosis into pale ethereal clouds of pink and white blossoms, the city is exquisitely transformed by their fragile loveliness, the perfect fusion of beauty and power. It is difficult to believe that this magnificence grew out of what George Washington described as a mosquito-infested swamp. President Washington appointed French engineer Pierre L'Enfant to lay out the new capital along the Potomac River in 1791. His grand idea for a promenade, the Mall, would later connect the capital to the Lincoln Memorial with 2 miles of open green space and elegant reflecting pools. The polished black granite walls of the powerful and immensely moving Vietnam Veterans Memorial reflect the sun, the grass, and the faces of those who come to see and touch the names carved in shining stone. Designed by a young woman, 21-year-old Maya Ying Lin, the memorial preserves the names of all those dead or missing in the Vietnam War. As part of the design criteria, the monument could make no political statement on the Vietnam War. But the 492-foot wall bearing the names of the 58,000 lost makes its own silent statement about the cost of war in human lives. Also on the mall is a gift from an Englishman who had never been to the United States. He left his entire fortune, $500,000, to found an institution in Washington to increase and diffuse knowledge. His name was James Smithson, and his legacy is the Smithsonian Institution. The flamboyant castle was the first of the museums. At last count, the Smithsonian administers 14 museums with a staff of 4,000 and houses 75 million items in its collection. So packed is America's attic that only 1% of the collection at the Museum of Natural History is on display. One of the most popular collections is the National Air and Space Museum, which has everything from the Wright brothers' plane to the Apollo 11 command module. L'Enfant's original design called for a large president's palace. Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson remarked that the proposed residence was large enough for 2 emperors, 1 pope, and the Grand Lama. The plans were scaled down considerably by President Washington, who removed the entire 3rd story. But when Jefferson became president, he immediately set about enlarging it by adding the east and west wings. Built of white sandstone, what Washington had called the President's House was soon nicknamed the White House. It symbolizes the executive branch of government. Capitol Hill, site of the House of Representatives and the Senate, has become symbolic of the legislative branch and the Supreme Court of the judicial branch. Considering that Washington, D.C. is the ultimate seat of power in the United States, what lingers longest is the impression of Washington's monumental beauty. Many of the homes in the Smoky Mountains were left in ruins by the Civil War. Patiently rebuilt again over the years, they retain much of their original down-home charm.
In the Great Smoky Mountains that touches the sky, where a man is born free.
The Appalachian culture, its handcrafts, music, and song, remain as vibrant as they were more than a century ago. Country music grew up in poverty, just like many of its singers and songwriters. The sound came to Nashville, Tennessee during the Great Depression, when country folk who had little suddenly discovered it was possible to have less. They flocked to Nashville and brought with them their music. Centuries-old Irish and British folk songs met up with the rhythms of Tin Pan Alley, the fervor of gospel, and the aching melodic line of the songs of former slaves. Then singers added dreams of fame and riches. Out of the potent mix of poverty, hope, and music came Hank Williams, Roy Acuff, Dolly Parton, and Loretta Lynn. In 1954, Elvis Presley was turned away from the Grand Ole Opry with the advice that he stick to driving a truck. The same year, promoter Sam Phillips heard him sing. Rock and roll met the mainstream, and a skinny, dark-haired kid with swivel hips made the introduction. Parent-child relationships have never been quite the same. Elvis was 22 years old when he bought Graceland to go with his gold-laden Cadillac covered with 40 coats of paint and crushed diamonds. Graceland stands on Elvis Presley Boulevard in Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis died and was buried here, the final resting place of an American music legend remembered as the King. Located on a thumb of land where the Cooper and Ashley rivers flow into the sea, Charleston heard the first shot fired in the Civil War. Its gracious architecture and magnificent gardens retain the flavor and charm of the Old South. A carriage ride through the historic district displays the city's ample charms, particularly the Calhoun Mansion, a 30-room Victorian manor house built in 1876, the Edmonston Alston House, and the Nathaniel Russell House. "15 miles north of Charleston, Middleton Place is the oldest landscaped garden in the country. A National Historic Landmark, the daily life of this 18th century self-sufficient low country plantation is recreated down to the last authentic detail. Lush gardens laid out by Henry Middleton in 1741 feature the oldest camellias in the New World. Dense with tall cypress, elegantly draped with graceful gray mosses, the luxuriant vegetation of Okefenokee Swamp is reflected in the still waters. This spiritually powerful, eternally mysterious marshland covers an area of 660 square miles, stretching across southern Georgia into Florida. The Creek tribe gave it the name Okefenokee, land of the trembling earth. Miami is an anomaly among American cities. The southernmost major city in the United States, nobody thinks of it as being southern. Much of Miami's exotic appeal comes from its Latin heritage. Juan Ponce de Leon found Florida in 1513. Miami's present Latin flavor is derived mainly from Cuban, Central, and South American influences. Little Havana is a world of its own. Calle Ocho is the main street, lined with cafes filled with Cuban men concentrating intensely on dominoes and cards. Many of the residents are the well-educated professionals who fled Cuba's communist regime in the late 1950s. Others came much earlier, bringing such skills as the precision cutting and rolling of superb hand-rolled cigars, using the same techniques that have made Havana cigars world famous. Many have come to Miami's subtropical splendors not fleeing political repression, but seeking refuge from winter. Coconut Grove, famed as an exclusive neighborhood, is where international harvester magnate James Deering decided to escape Midwestern winters. 1,000 workers labored 2 years to build him a 16th century style Venetian palazzo called Vizcaya. A palatial estate surrounded by 10 acres of formal gardens, Vizcaya houses an eclectic collection of European art and antiques. For most people, Miami Beach is the soul and spirit of Miami. Best of all is South Beach, a mile-square district of colorful 1930s Art Deco hotels and restaurants. Chic cafes line the sidewalks, sleek facades pose for photographers, and snowbirds, northerners fleeing winter's chill, share the beaches with relaxed retirees. The road to relaxation, popularly known as Route A1A, leapfrogs from island to island along the southern tip of Florida. Stretching tenuously out across the turquoise sea, the Florida Keys are a string of tiny islands that end in Key West, the southernmost point of the continental U.S. 90 miles from Havana, Cuba, Key West is adrift in a vast expanse of blue sea and sky. Mellow may be too hectic a term to describe the lifestyle of the resident conchs, a nickname for Key Westerners derived from the conch shells found offshore. The 30,000 islanders pass the time by taking careful inventory at the numerous drinking establishments, thrilling at the chance to land the big one, and watching the famous sunsets best viewed from Mallory Square amidst the artists and musicians. Famed novelist Ernest "Papa" Hemingway lived in Key West, fished the azure waters, and used these enchanting islands as the setting for his novel, To Have and Have Not. Called a river of grass by the Seminoles, who knew intimately the twistings and turnings of this extraordinary wetlands, Everglades National Park stands unique in all of North America. The Everglades is actually a slow-moving freshwater river 100 miles long, 50 miles wide, and no more than a few inches deep. Wherever the soil rises even 3 inches above the water, pine and hardwood trees take root. Romantically labeled mermaids by the inebriated imaginations of early sailors,